Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we are diving straight into a massive regulatory shift from the center regarding medicinal syrups. This is a complete overhaul of how we access everyday medicines here in India, and it's going to impact everything from your local pharmacy right down to your own medicine cabinet. So we're going to unpack the data, the new regulations, and the actual real-world impact of this fascinating policy change.
But okay, before we get into the heavy regulatory weeds, let me ask you something that might genuinely surprise you. Did you know that some everyday, over-the-counter medicinal syrups and tinctures that you can buy right this second contain up to 90% alcohol? Yeah, you heard that right. The exact same medicines someone might just casually pick up for a minor stomachache or a stubborn cough.
90%. Seriously, just let that number sink in for a second. For decades, some medical formulations have had alcohol concentrations rivaling or frankly even exceeding hard liquor, and you literally haven't even needed a prescription to buy them. So how exactly did this happen?
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the hidden alcohol loophole.
So for a really long time, the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940 has included this thing called Schedule K. Now, Schedule K was designed to provide regulatory exemptions. Basically, it allowed certain life-saving remedies and specific medicines to totally bypass strict licensing and prescription controls. And look, the original idea was actually quite noble. The goal was to ensure easy, over-the-counter access to basic, traditional remedies without constantly bogging down doctors. We're talking about really simple stuff. Tinctures of cardamom, ginger, aromatic spices used as mild digestive aids. But, as you might guess, here's exactly where the problem took root. This well-intentioned Schedule K exemption was heavily exploited. Manufacturers quickly realized that, hey, if they just added a tiny hint of ginger or cardamom to a highly alcoholic base, they could legally sell products containing 80 to 90% ethyl alcohol right over the counter. And over time, state agencies and drug regulators started noticing a deeply concerning trend. People were actively hoarding these specific medicinal preparations. They weren't using them to cure a stomachache, they were using them as cheap, highly accessible substitutes for liquor.
Which brings us to Section 2, triggers for a crackdown. Look, authorities realized they had to act, and fast. Multiple state governments and agencies were repeatedly flagging this issue. They were seeing widespread misuse by adolescents and adults who were seeking intoxication at the local pharmacy counter rather than a liquor store. But the problem went way beyond just people looking for a cheap high. You see, the lack of stringent oversight on these easily accessible drugs opened the door for terrible, completely unregulated manufacturing practices. And this directly led to the discovery of toxic solvents in medical batches. It turned what was a regulatory headache into an absolute fatal crisis.
To put that into perspective, let's look at one heartbreaking example that really accelerated this entire crackdown. A heavily adulterated cough syrup named Coldriff was linked to the tragic deaths of over 20 children in Chhindwara, Madhya Pradesh. When labs finally analyzed the affected batch, they made a horrifying discovery. It was contaminated with a highly toxic industrial solvent called diethylene glycol, or DEG, at a staggering concentration of 46.8%. So alongside the intoxication issue, this severe contamination crisis proved without a doubt that the open access system was dangerously broken and, tragically, costing lives.
Now for the solution. Section 3, enter Schedule H1.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast. To grasp the magnitude of this change, we just have to put the old reality directly against the new one. Under the old Schedule K, high alcohol syrups were freely available over the counter, no prescription needed, and pharmacies didn't even need a special retail license to stock the stuff. But under the new rules, these drugs are moved to Schedule H1. And this is a strict lock-and-key reality. A doctor's prescription is now absolutely required, local chemists must possess a valid retail license, and crucially, they have to maintain detailed, rigorous records of every single sale.
But what exactly gets caught in this new net? Well, the center has defined a very specific, targeted parameter so consumers and pharmacy operators know exactly what's affected. Any oral formulation containing more than 12% volume-by-volume ethyl alcohol, meaning 12 milliliters of alcohol for every 100 milliliters of syrup, and packed in quantities exceeding 30 milliliters, will now fall squarely under Schedule H1. Essentially, this rule rips these high alcohol syrups out of the Schedule K exemptions altogether the moment they breach that 12% limit.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the new 12% threshold creates a uniform regulatory framework across the board. You see, the drugs rules actually already had prescribed alcohol limits for traditional systems of medicine. Ayurvedic, Siddha, and Unani syrups under Rule 161, They're permitted a maximum of 16% alcohol. Homeopathic medicines under Rule 106B are capped to 12%. So now, the new allopathic Schedule H1 rule aligns perfectly with these existing limits by capping the over-the-counter threshold at 12%. It neatly closes the loophole and levels the playing field across all types of medicine.
Let's look at the timeline. Section 4, the 6-month transition.
So, this regulatory shift hasn't just happened overnight. It's been in the works for quite a while. Back in October of last year, a draft proposal was officially recommended by the Drugs Technical Advisory Board, or DTAB. Fast forward to this July, and the official Gazette notification was published by the Union Health Ministry. Now the clock is ticking down to January 2027. That is when this transition window fully closes, the new rules go into full effect, and strict enforcement begins on the ground. So the crucial point is what this actually looks like at your local pharmacy by January 2027. Basically, local chemists cannot just operate as usual anymore. To sell these specific syrups, they are now required to obtain prior valid retail licenses from relevant authorities. They can only dispense the medicine if a patient hands them a valid medical prescription from a registered doctor. And on top of that, they are legally required to maintain highly detailed sales records, tracking both the prescriber's details and the patient's details. This creates a traceable chain of accountability designed specifically to prevent diversion.
Finally, Section 5, the Enforcement Challenge.
We found a really insightful perspective from a pediatrician who was analyzing this exact new rule. They said, rules are made at the government level, but implementing them at the chemist level, especially in grade B and C cities, is very difficult. Implementation is going to be a challenge. The medical community deeply welcomes this step. After all, it protects adolescents and vulnerable populations, but they are fully, acutely aware that local compliance is the true hurdle here.
Because, the ground reality is deeply complex. Historically, India has had a problem not necessarily with creating regulations, right? It's implementing them effectively. There is notoriously low public awareness about the dangers of these high alcohol medicines. Consumers are completely used to the historical ease of just walking up to a counter and buying cheap medicine without having to pay a doctor's consulting fee. Because of this baked-in demand, there is going to be immense temptation for local chemists to just quietly bypass the new rules and hand the syrups over.
Which leaves us with a critical, incredibly provocative question to ponder. As January 2027 rapidly approaches, how will local authorities actually bridge this massive enforcement gap across India's insanely vast and decentralized network of local chemists? Will this new Schedule H1 mandate successfully protect public health and end the misuse, or is it just going to push the problem underground? It's a truly complex reality of implementing healthcare regulations in such a diverse nation, and we are going to have to watch very closely to see how it unfolds.